Good evening and welcome to this meeting of Rother District Council's Licensing and General Purposes Committee. The first item on the agenda are the minutes of the previous meeting, which have been circulated. Do I have your permission to sign? Proposed, seconded. Thank you. Thank you. Second item are apologies and substitutes.
Apologies received from Councillor Errington, and Councillor Byrne is here as substitute.
Thank you. And item 3, there is an additional agenda item, I understand.
Yes, Chair. The item of the Inchworth Parish Council is an additional agenda item which has been agreed with yourself to be accepted.
And thank you. And item 4, disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures of interest, personal or prejudicial?
Yes, please.
Councillor Field.
Thank you. If the additional agenda item is carried, I will have a personal interest in, because I will therefore then be a member of Watlington Parish Council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We then come on to the substantive agenda items, and the item number 5 are the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire licence fees. There are proposals for increases. Richard Parker Harding.
Thank you, Chair. At the last meeting, members agreed to consult on increasing operator and vehicle licence fees. The consultation was carried out and 3 responses were received, which are set out in Appendix A to your report. To give members some background to this, operator and vehicle licence fees were last increased in 2011, and officers have taken the opportunity to look at each licence and calculate how much time each licence takes to administer and enforce, and therefore the fees have been calculated on that basis, which are set out in Appendix B. In paragraph 9, members will note that even if these increases are agreed by members this evening, there will still be a deficit in the budget of £51,000. I think it would be unrealistic for us to increase the fees any further at this stage, but it is important that we work towards achieving a balanced budget on this account. That's my introduction. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Richard. Do councillors have questions? Yes, Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, as I'm not normally on this committee, and it might be something everybody else knows. This is shared. We share the service, do we not, with Wealden? How many members of staff are permanently on taxi licensing and enforcement?
Well, the licensing team obviously carries out a number of licensing functions, including premises licences for alcohol, taxi licensing, and all gambling licences. In the table in the report where it says salaries, that is the salaries which are attributable to taxi licensing in Rother only. So if you look at that salary, it's just under £50,000. So therefore, that's almost equivalent of probably 1 FTE working on taxi licensing for Rother.
Full-time equivalent?
Yes.
FTE full-time equivalent, yes. Well, does that answer your question? Yes. Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
I'm curious about to what extent will we have to increase the fees across the board? What percentage will we have to increase them by to eliminate that £51,000 deficit, please?
Well, we'd need to increase it by another 50%. Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
I noticed, you mentioned that these haven't been increased since 2011, which is an extraordinarily long time.
Yes.
I don't know how many times the rate of inflation has gone up what percentage it would be since then, but quite a lot, I would think. Yes. And we have Councillor Paul Courtell.
Thank you, Chair. Could you explain what's included in the support service?
Yes, the support services includes legal services costs, IT costs, financial costs, and costs associated with maintenance of this building and reception. In taxi licensing is quite heavy, particularly in terms of financial costs, because there's so many transactions which go through the licensing system.
Thank you.
Councillor Field, who is appearing remotely.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I think the earlier part of this discussion and your own remarks makes the case very eloquently for an annual small increment in fees. Then we don't have to have a large jump 12 years after the last one. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if you heard that, Councillor Field. There was a murmur of appreciation around the room.
Thank you. I didn't.
Councillor Timpey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In the papers, you refer to the modern version of fit and proper as safe and suitable, but fit and proper is still the legal definition. So will it ever change to, where did safe and suitable come from?
Well, members will be aware that taxi legislation was last updated in 1976, so I wouldn't hold your breath as to when it will be next updated, probably outside our lifetimes.
Okay, thank you. And the other, I had actually sent you a couple of questions, one of which was about the support services, which you've just answered. But the staffing, the salaries figures has gone down, hasn't it, from, I think you gave us a table of 2015 through, and that salary figure was quite high back in 2015-16. I presume that's because everything is done online now, is it? Or you've lost staff? Or?
Yes, we've obviously tried to reduce employment costs by when people have left, as to review whether we need that person or whether we need that person on that salary. So we haven't managed to reduce employment costs in the licensing team itself, and we've achieved that by making sure that drivers and applications can be made online, whereas in the past everything was done in paper, and then there was large amounts of paper coming into the office and being sent out. We don't do that now. Everything's now done, should be done online, and that means that if someone fills in the application form online, then it immediately populates our database, which achieves a saving.
Thank you.
Councillor Courtell, I think this might be one last one.
Okay, thank you. Just trying to understand the pattern historically in Appendix C. The support service more than doubled from 15-16 to 16-17 and then stayed relatively stable. Could I ask why it's doubled at that point?
I would have to ask the financial officers for the precise reason, but I would think what tends to happen is that every so often that they do a sort of review of the entire council's support costs and sort of look at how many transactions there are in finance, what the legal services recharge should be. So probably between 15-16 and 16-17, the finance department did a review and sort of reallocated the support costs across all the cost codes the council has.
Councillor Timpey.
Yeah, thank you. The point made by Councillor Field about smaller increases annually, because this is probably quite a shock, isn't it, for the taxi community, I would think. I just don't understand why from 2011 nobody thought to do that, really.
The reason why we haven't increased fees since 2011 is because obviously in 2012 the shared environmental health and licensing service was created, and that produced substantial savings, which meant that we didn't have to increase fees at that time. I had intended to increase fees about 3 years ago, but then of course COVID happened, which meant all the finances went completely haywire because it wasn't quite clear how many drivers we had. Lots of drivers retired, so it was very difficult to actually understand what our income was going to be because it probably was false at that time. So I delayed in putting the increases forward 3 years ago, so it shouldn't have been that long. And I said with the reasons why we didn't increase in 2011 because in 2012 we had the shared service, and that substantially reduced the costs.
Thank you. But there are some of them that are going up significant percentage, aren't they? It's unfortunate that only 2 taxi drivers actually responded to the consultation, but they weren't happy, were they?
No, the 3 responses we get are opposed to the increase. The reason why some of the fees have gone up more than others is because I said this exercise will be calculated the time it takes for each type of licence, so that it takes much longer to deal with new applications than renewals, so therefore those fees have gone up substantially more. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to be fair across all the licences, so that the actual licence is based on the time it takes to process and the time it takes to enforce.
And I think just to be clear, Rother is only allowed to charge an amount which will cover his expenses. There can be no profit element in this. And I think from what you say, we are still 51,000 a year out of pocket, even at the increased fees. Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chairman. Was there prior consultation with the Bexhill Taxi Drivers Association?
The Bexhill Taxi Drivers Association hasn't existed for a number of years. The Bexhill Taxi Drivers Association has not existed for a number of years.
I recently met a gentleman who claimed to express the opinion of the Bexhill Taxi Drivers Association. So it doesn't exist?
As far as I'm aware, the association doesn't exist.
Councillor.
I'm very confused about that because we have our lovely Dave here tonight representing the taxi drivers, I believe. So is there not another organisation that exists apart from the Taxi Drivers Association? Dave? Apparently it's in limbo at the moment. That probably explains why. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you. Unless there are any further matters, I think perhaps we're moving towards a vote. Would anyone wish to propose this? Councillor Thomas, you're very brave. And would somebody second? Councillor Madeley. Thank you. And those in favour? That is carried. Do I have to do those against? Those against? And abstentions? Thank you. That is carried. Next item, item number 6, Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Policy and Guidance. Richard Parker Harding again.
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks approval for the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Policy and Guidance 2023. Up till now, the Council has had what's always been known as the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Handbook. And over the years, various people have asked us what our policy is, and we've pointed them to the handbook. And therefore, we thought we ought to get up to modern times and actually call it what it is, which is a policy. We've taken into account the Statutory Taxi and Private Hire Standards Report 2020, which the government published in 2020. And so what this new policy, which we are proposing is adopted, takes into account all the items which are in the government's standard and puts them into our policy handbook. When Appendix B sets out the changes which we are proposing. So just to run through the sort of major changes in terms of people who work in operators' offices who carry out dispatching and booking, they will be required to be registered with the operator, so we actually know who is carrying out the dispatching and booking of vehicles. The penalty point scheme, we just wanted to make it clear that applies to existing licensed drivers and not to new applications, because anybody who applies to the council for a licence should be considered to be fit and proper. There should be no doubt about whether they are fit and proper, and therefore it's not appropriate to give new applications penalty points. That's always been the case at this authority, but we just wanted to make it clear in the policy. The other requirements which will be in the policy are requiring all drivers to belong to the DBS update system. At the moment, so we require drivers to update their DBS on a regular basis. With DBS, if you sign up to the updates service for an additional £13 a year, your DBS is automatically updated. You don't have to then reapply every 6 months or every year, and therefore it's advantageous to the driver to pay the £13. It's advantageous to the council because we have a continuous check on whether or not the driver's received a criminal conviction. The policy also incorporates a recommendation which was made some time ago, making compulsory training for drivers on all aspects of safeguarding. Last year, you may recall that we offered all drivers training on safeguarding, which was paid for by the Rother Community Safety Partnership, and that training has been taken up by existing drivers. Going forward, new drivers will have to complete the compulsory training. And finally, the main major change is that in future, in line with government guidance, proprietors of vehicles will also have to undergo basic DBS checks. The only aspect where we won't be complying with the government standard is in terms of requiring mandatory CCTV in vehicles, and that is a subject of the next report. So, what we're proposing for the policy really is just brings the council up into line with government policy.
Thank you. Councillors. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is pretty sort of straightforward and sensible. I can speak to the ease of it's a lot easier to do the automatically updating DBS. Yeah, speaking as a teacher, who has to do that. But it's also ensures that extra safety element as well. So I think that's sensible, and the rest of it's pretty sensible as well. And I'm happy to propose it if no one else wants to say anything about it.
Thank you, and we have a seconder from Councillor Timpey. Unless councillors wish to debate this, we shall move to... Do you wish to speak, Councillor Byrne?
Thank you. Just a point of information, as this is a shared service, is this identical to the document to which Wealdon adhere?
Although it's a shared service, both Rother and Wealdon are independent in terms of their licence as independent licensing authorities. So both authorities are free to adopt whatever policies they wish. But obviously, in terms of officers, it's much easier if the policies are as near identical as they can be, and they are as near identical as they can be. There are some chain differences in that Wealdon will only license vehicles which have a younger vintage than Rother do. But that's the only main difference now between Rother and Wealdon, is that the limit which Wealdon set is lower in terms of years after registration than Rother does at the moment.
Again, with evidence. A driver who was bringing back from Gatwick was complaining that the vehicle inspection, he had a steering wheel cover on, which he was told was not good, was not an appropriate internal fitting, and yet he said Wealdon no problem at all, and he said we continually get. It seems to be a lot of discretion amongst the inspectors as to which bits of a vehicle have got to be, the outside is pristine and all of that, but what is appropriate internally seems to differ slightly. So I just thought an alignment, as it's a shared service, an alignment of the policies of that sort of area. I can understand the age of the vehicle differing, but an alignment on those policies would, I think, get rid of some of the perceived, pernicketiness that the drivers see from the vehicle inspection sometimes. So is there a check that those inspections are being carried out in a consistent way across both authorities, given that it's the same person doing it?
I can't understand why there should be any differences, given it is the same officer who inspects vehicles for Rotherham and Wealdon. They all come here and they're all inspected here by the same officers. So I don't see why there should be any difference. There's no difference in the policies between the two authorities.
Well, just be aware there is a perception, rightly or wrongly, that there is a difference. So maybe that could be addressed.
Well, thank you. Unless there's anyone else, we'll move to a vote. We have a proposer and seconder. Those in favour? I think that's unanimous. Thank you, councillors. That's carried. And this then brings us on to the CCTV item, which is a recommendation for deferral, I understand.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, obviously, at the last meeting, again, members agreed to carry out consultation with the public and the trade around whether or not CCTV should be compulsory in vehicles. It is a recommendation of the government that a serious consideration is given to make CCTV mandatory, and there is a requirement on the government to carry out this consultation. Obviously, the consultation was carried out, and the results are within the report. I think there is obviously a difference, quite a dramatic difference, between the views of the public and the views of the trade. The public generally wanted CCTV and would have felt safer with CCTV being in the vehicles, and the drivers felt the opposite. Obviously, the report includes the views of Sussex Police, who, again, would recommend that we do require CCTV to be mandatory. The reason really why I'm recommending deferral, though, for 18 months is simply because of the problems which we have in overcoming the data protection issues around making it mandatory to have CCTV in vehicles. If we made it mandatory, then the council would become the data controller. That is, of course, quite an onerous on the authority in terms of its legal responsibilities to maintain that data in a secure way, and also in terms of IT capacity to store that data. Other authorities which have already adopted this requirement to make CCTV mandatory haven't yet implemented it in practice because they are finding a great deal of difficulty in overcoming the practical matters of data storage and compliance with the legislation. And therefore, I felt it wasn't responsible for me to recommend we go for mandatory CCTV at this stage, when actually in practice we couldn't actually implement it. So I prefer to wait for the other authorities who are trying to implement this at the moment and see how they get on. So then we can all have a sensible way forward if members wish to make it mandatory. Most local authorities are moving forward. Ading and Worthing are going to make it compulsory. Chichester are moving forward in that way. Obviously, Brighton and Hove already have it as a requirement, and Wealdon has decided to defer, and Hastings hasn't made a decision yet.
And presumably, if we did defer, we say the recommendation is to defer for 18 months, but if you found it became possible in, say, a year, you would come back to the newly formed committee.
Yes.
So it wouldn't have to be 18 months necessarily. Thank you. Councillor Timpey.
Thank you, Chair. So does this mean that currently a taxi driver can put it in voluntarily?
Yes, at the moment, any taxi driver can voluntarily have put CCTV in. If they do put CCTV in, then there will be put specific conditions on the licence. Because again, what we need to make sure is if someone does put CCTV in, is that the privacy of the passengers is maintained. So it should be, in terms of our conditions, if the driver puts in CCTV, they don't themselves have access to those recordings. The data is held by a third party, and then only if the police or the driver or someone else wants, they can apply to the third party for that data to be released. So there are safeguards in terms of the passengers at the moment, so that no driver, they can put it in voluntarily. Some drivers put it in for their own protection, but they can't actually access the data without going through the third party.
Thank you. And do you know if we have any? Do we have any in our district at the moment?
Yes, there will be about a dozen or so vehicles which have CCTV. And some, obviously, companies like 24/7 who operate from Hastings, they always have CCTV.
Councillor Field.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, instinctively, I don't like the Big Brother approach, but we have just agreed that they would all have safeguarding training. Taxis and hackney carriages are very intimate spaces, so I think actually it's a very good thing. I think it will protect both the driver and the passengers from any potential claims and counterclaims. But I wondered if perhaps, obviously I can't propose this because I'm here, not there, if perhaps an approval in principle might go some way towards reassuring those that a deferral isn't just putting it on the back burner and waiting.
Yes, well, I don't know if it is yet, but it might be the view of the meeting this evening. But of course, we'll have a new committee in a month's time, and which might take a different view. But we'll certainly find out what the views of the councillors are here tonight. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was thinking along similar lines to Councillor Field. Possibly like some sort of statement of intent that as soon as practicable, or as soon as we've built up that knowledge and capacity to become data controllers, it is the view of this committee that we want that to be sort of implemented, or at least considered for implementation, so that it's ready to go. So as soon as it becomes viable for us to do it, because I think it's really important. And looking at the consultation and everything, I think it's really key that we get this in place as soon as we practicably can. But equally, it would be silly to implement this now when we haven't got the capacity to actually store the data properly, and then the taxi drivers are sort of left in limbo as to, well, do I need to put a camera in? Where do I go? What do I do? But I think as soon as it's practicable, we need to make sure that whatever licensing committee is in the next term of office gets it out there as quick as possible.
I see a fair amount of nodding around the room, rather than calling on each councillor to speak. Would Councillor Field wish to propose an amendment? She can't. She's not allowed to because she's removed.
I can't. No.
Councillor Coleman, would you like to propose an amendment?
In Councillor Field's physical absence, I shall propose it.
And what is the wording of the amendment?
Roughly what I just said, Chair. I'm hoping Louise is writing something down of that general gist.
Yeah.
CCTV mandatory is improved to principle and deferred.
Yes, of course.
Well, yes.
Yes, that we'll putting Sam Coleman's amendment into words. The amendment would be to add a line saying that the committee approves CCTV in principle, but defers. Yes? And that is proposed by Councillor Coleman, seconded by Councillor Timpey. Those in favour? And that's unanimous. And I think with that we move to the substantive motion.
Just vote on the amendment. That's carried, so that's it.
The amendment is carried, yes. The amendment is carried, and we move to the substantive motion. I don't think anyone needs to speak, or do they? No? No. So we need a proposer and seconder for the substantive motion, do we not? Councillor Madeley and Councillor Coleman. Those in favour of the substantive motion? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And the additional item is, of course, the inquirate parish councils of Udimore and Watlington. Councillor Field has to redeclare.
Yeah, redeclaring, Chair.
And thank you. So is this... Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just as you'll be aware from the report, at the close of nominations, there were 2 parish councils that had insufficient people put forward to actually be quorate. So that means they can't operate until such time as they can get replacements. In circumstances like this, there's provision in law for us to appoint people to the parish council. In order to keep it fair and even, we've always appointed, as a matter of course, the county member for the parish concerned and the district member or members, in which case we're so that we're not under any sort of accusations of politicising or picking certain people over others. So in this case, in both Udimore and Watlington, that's what we're proposing to do. That means we will get them up to 3 people. That is only, those appointments only apply to till such time as they can either co-opt or gain extra members on, and then the appointments fall away. What we're also asking, and I must confess we thought we'd done this last time but hadn't, is rather than, this tends to happen at most elections, and that's probably not necessarily something to be proud of, but rather than come to this committee, if the committee are happy with those principles of appointing the county member and the 2 district members, then the Chief Executive has got delegated authority to do that without necessarily having to come here. It was convenient tonight. We had a meeting before the election. If not, we would probably have had to have called a special one. So I'm happy to take any questions if there are any, Chair.
Councillor Gordon.
Yes, Malcolm, I believe there's a paperwork problem with Udimore. The Udimore, I think we've got 4 candidates who wish to, take on the job.
So I know some people have been critical of the process. All I can say a little bit is don't shoot the messenger. We don't establish the process. We do. There have been issues this year. I think particularly with the parishes. I know there is a move to raise it through East Elkin on up through the National Association. We will report back to the through the Local Government Association and through our own Electoral Commission routes. We've never had a problem in eventually getting there, let's put it that way. So I'm sure Udimore will be dealt with, as I'm sure Watlington will be as well.
So I think Udimore can spell and write, so that's quite good news for the residents of Udimore. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'd also heard that Udimore does have sufficient people willing to serve on the parish council. So we'll be very happy to see those posts filled in the ordinary way after May the 4th. And we look forward to that happening. Does any councillor wish to speak? No? In which case, do we have a proposer and seconder? Proposed by Councillor Gordon, seconded by Councillor Coleman. Those in favour? That is carried unanimously. And thank you. And I think that concludes the formal business of the meeting.
7:05.
At 7:05. But before I formally close the meeting, I'd just like to say this is, of course, the last meeting of this committee as presently constituted, and we'll be saying goodbye to some and not to all, and we don't quite know. All depends on the events of May the 4th. So I'd like to thank you all very much for your contributions over the years, and I look forward to seeing those of you who wish to come back here. And I would also like to thank the officers who have given us so much support and made life so very easy for me personally on this committee. I thank them very much indeed. Thank you. Oh, and Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask if a note could be made with thanks to the Chair for your commitment to this committee.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sure I don't have to put that to the vote. And with that, I formally conclude this meeting. Thank you all very much.